Hi, I'm Rick Kaler. Thanks for joining me. Well, for most state governments, that includes South Dakota, the chickens are coming home to roost. For decades, state and local governments have spent far more than they've received in tax revenue. They've funded that shortfall by borrowing and pushing the repayment out into the future, hoping against hope that somehow the money to repay the debts or the obligations they were accruing would come from increasing tax revenues. Unfortunately, a lot of those increases didn't materialize. In some cases, tax revenues actually fell as taxpayers' incomes shrank, or highly taxed individuals and companies moved to states with lower tax bases. Cities and states that overspent and overpromised are now seeing lenders begin to refuse requests for new borrowing or raising interest rates as their bond ratings are falling. Now they've got to make the painful decision to actually cut spending. This, by necessity, must include the programs most responsible for the overspending, which are the entitlement programs like education, Medicare, Medicaid, and public pensions. Fortunately, in South Dakota, most of the overspending has been funded by taking the savings that we set aside for various projects and emergencies and spending down those trust funds. Governor Dennis Daugaard has proposed a budget that will cut the structural overspending 10% across the board, and that's going to include education, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now, national polls will say that most taxpayers are all for cutting spending, except when it comes to cutting the entitlement programs. Predictably, most people also oppose cuts to programs that benefit them directly. Now, since education and health care entitlement programs make up 2/3 of the overspending in South Dakota, we would need to cut every other government program by about 1/3 to balance our budget. That would reduce law enforcement, road repair, and other government services to a point that would certainly bring new cries of outrage. So while most government departments are attempting to comply with the governor's 10% cuts, officials in the State Investment Office are saying their budget shouldn't be cut at all. Now, this particular department's in charge of managing and investing the retirement fund that 70,000 South Dakotans either depend on or will depend on in the future for their retirement income. So why does this office feel they should be treated differently than any other state agency? Well, they've got a pretty sound reason. Their funding doesn't come from tax revenue. It comes from the investment earnings of the fund. Now, reducing their salaries by 10% would add about $1.07 to each retiree's monthly benefit. Won't save the state one dime in revenue that could be offset against any other expenses. Well, the SDIC is one of the most bare-bone investment operations in the country. The state of South Dakota spends only 8 basis points, that's 0.08 of 1%, for investment advice and management. Now contrast that with the more normal range that most of us pay of 50 basis points, which is 0.5%, which is pretty cheap, to 2% to 100 basis points. It's pretty clear that South Dakota is adding huge value to their retirees at 8 basis points. When you consider the fact that South Dakota outperforms 99% of other public plans, the incredibly low expense ratio of 8 basis points is even more startling. Now, how do they do this? Well, the SDIC keeps costs low by outsourcing very little. They keep investment jobs in South Dakota where staff members do earn less than the median industry salaries they could earn elsewhere. Cutting their salaries even further would hurt South Dakota's attempt to keep our outperformance by attracting the best investment professionals. And our outperformance is huge. It adds hundreds of millions of dollars to the retirement fund annually. So saving a few dollars in salary costs now just isn't going to be worth the dollars it would cost current and future South Dakota retirees. Now, while Governor Dugard does understand that the SDIC's budget doesn't come from taxpayer dollars, and he lauds their outperformance, it doesn't change his position that the salary should be cut because of public perception and a need to be fair. Now, that thinking is a perfect example of a money script. It's further evidence that most irrational money decisions really aren't about the money. Thanks for listening.